As you know, earnings season is here, and today we're going to be talking about Ford, which had a bit of a hit or a miss, and I would argue probably more of a miss earnings report for Q2 of 2024. Now, a bit of a recap, you may remember that earlier this week I reported earnings for General Motors and Tesla. General Motors had a decently strong quarter, while Tesla had a weak and disappointing one. And while GM, Ford's top competitor, saw revenue growth, earnings per share growth, net income growth, and EV growth, Ford, not so much. And on this news, Ford stock is down more than 11%. Ford reported second quarter revenue of $47.8 billion and net income of $1.8 billion. While revenue was up year over year by 6%, net income was actually down by 0.5%. Earnings per share also declined, and while the decline was relatively small, in fact, I would argue it was very small. Earnings per share last year is at 47 cents per share. This year it was at 46 cents per share. And again, this is all things considered a very small difference. But where the issue really lies is the fact that the Ford stock is taking a pretty significant hit, because even though the earnings per share is just a bit off from last year, it is significantly off from analyst expectations. In fact, while revenue expectations were missed by only 0.2%, earnings per share expectations were missed by a whopping 31.27%. And I think it goes without saying that that isn't a good thing. Another blow to Ford was guidance expectations, and this is wherever GM can come in as a pretty good comparison. While GM was able to raise their full year guidance with this most recent earnings report, which is basically their way of saying, hey, things are going well, we feel confident, and we are growing faster than we anticipated for 2024, Ford was not able to raise their guidance and expectations. Now, the two biggest issues that are plaguing Ford right now are really two key things. One is their electric vehicles. This past quarter, Ford lost $1.1 billion on EVs, bringing the total cumulative losses for 2024 to a whopping $2.4 billion. Ford sold 23,957 vehicles, which was more than GM, but they still lost $1.1 billion this quarter alone. And so while Ford is seeing year-over-year sales growth, not only amongst all of their EVs, but also amongst each individual EV lineup as well, this sales growth is still leading to massive losses, which is really interesting because, again, bringing the comparison to General Motors EV losses have historically been about half of Ford's. And while Ford does sell more EVs than General Motors, they don't sell twice as much, so you can't attribute that 2x losses that Ford has over GM over the fact that Ford sells significantly more vehicles than GM, because while Ford does sell more vehicles than GM, they only sell a few thousand more. But the losses of Ford compared to GM are significantly and disproportionately more. But that isn't really what's interesting, and that isn't even something that's new. Ford has been losing money off of their EVs basically since they rolled out their EVs, and while this is expected whenever automakers begin to produce a new vehicle lineup, especially something as different as an electric vehicle, we do have to ask the question of when is the bleeding going to stop? Or at least, when is it going to slow down? Because this year, it's estimated that Ford is going to lose a whopping $5 billion off of EVs. But what's actually interesting about the whole Ford EV narrative is the fact that losses with Ford EVs are, in my opinion, much more publicized than losses with GM EVs. If you look up the Ford EV lineup, the first thing that you'll see is Ford EV losses. But that same thing isn't really said for General Motors. And I think that this is due to the fact of how Ford has decided to segment out their vehicle lineup. Ford in the last few years has changed their lineup to be 3 different business sectors under the Ford umbrella. We have Ford Blue, which is your traditional gas cars, Ford Pro, which is their commercial vehicle lineup, and Ford Model E, which is their electric lineup. And Ford actually sends out their earnings based off of these categories. While you do get an earnings report for the overall Ford company, they also give you a breakdown of the earnings based off of these categories. So you learn what the revenue and income was for Ford Pro, Ford Model E, and the Ford Blue. So you can see how these different segments are comparing to one another from a revenue perspective, income perspective, and margin perspective. Ford isn't the only one that segments out their earnings based off of the type of cars that are being produced. For example, Tesla does something very similar. They basically give you delivery numbers for the Model Y and the Model 3, and then separate delivery numbers for the S, X, and Cybertruck. So you don't have specific breakdowns by make and model, instead it's by category, and this is basically what Ford is doing as well. And so due to the fact that Ford has segmented out their business into 3 different sectors, it's very, very easy to see how much money EVs are losing. Which, to be honest, I don't think that's a good thing, and I don't think it's playing towards Ford's favor whenever it comes to EVs in their process of working out the kinks and the losses in producing these new vehicles. So while reviewing Ford's earnings report, it's actually very, very easy to decipher which segments of Ford are performing and which ones aren't. For example, Ford Pros, so their commercial lineup, their revenue grew by 9% and their net income grew by 15%. Ford Blue, their more retail customer-based lineup, their revenue was down, and Ford Model E, their electric lineup, saw astronomical losses. So it is very, very easy to see how much each segment of vehicle is losing and how they're faring compared to one another, but also compared to other automakers as well. The other issue that Ford is running into that other automakers like GM, for example, aren't dealing with, at least as of right now, is warranty costs and warranty problems. And this is a major problem for Ford. And if you were to ask me, I would tell you that they had this coming. Ford has a warranty issue, and it's an issue that has been around for years, and it's still that pesky problem that just hasn't gone away. Whether you love Ford or hate Ford, you have to admit that Ford has a quality control issue with specific models in their lineup. This is, at least in my opinion, most glaringly obvious with cars like the Ford Focus, Ford Fiesta, with their horrendous transmissions, but it stems to more recent cars as well, like the Ford Escape or Ford Edge. This is a decade-long problem that is coming to haunt Ford even today. Warranty costs for Ford this quarter alone cost the company $2.3 billion, which was $800 million more than last quarter and $700 million more than a year ago. Ford did state in their earnings call that this quarter's warranty costs were in large part attributed to cars 2021 and older, and that typically you don't see vehicle quality improvements reflected in warranty costs until 12 to 18 months later. And so if Ford is actually doing what they say they're doing, which is producing higher quality cars with less issues, then we will see these improvements reflected in their warranty costs in about 12 to 18 months. So probably at the end of 2024, if not going into 2025. This is great news, and in my opinion, a welcome consequence to producing cars with known issues. I've said this many times on this channel before, but until automakers are affected by their shady decisions, whether those decisions are things like not being transparent with pricing, not pushing back at dealerships that are being deceptive and unethical, or just producing low-quality cars with a slew of problems. Unless these types of decisions start affecting automakers' bottom line and their shareholders, they are never going to change. And now that it looks as though Ford's low-quality vehicles are truly costing Ford billions of dollars, it's resulting in lower profit, more expenses, and it is absolutely affecting their shareholders and their stock price. Hopefully Ford is actually going to do something about it, and they are going to improve their overall quality long term. Because truthfully, many of the issues that plague Ford vehicles, specifically their transmission problem, these are problems that should have been solved years ago, and these are issues that have been going on for about a decade now, which is just completely unacceptable. So what does all of this data and information mean? Well, one is that it means EVs, while growing year over year, are still costing Ford a lot of money, and while losses in EVs are nothing new for newer EV automakers, Ford losses are very large. Secondly is Ford, while seeing strong numbers in the commercial sector, are seeing some hurdles for retail customers. And thirdly, warranty costs are causing major issues for Ford, which hopefully will result in long-term quality improvements, but we won't really know that until some time has passed to actually test the quality of these newer cars. Like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.